Hello, quick word from Editing John here in the beginning. Just to let you know, this video has been in development hell for quite a long time. To be precise, since October 2024, because this was originally supposed to come out during Asexual Awareness Week back in October 2024. But yeah, I had trouble uploading the video with the editing and copyright and all that. Like YouTube was being a bit bitchy about it. But I hope that the way the video is now, it's still enjoyable, it's still watchable for you. I wasn't able to use as many clips as I usually do, but I hope that like me providing at least some screenshots and all that while I react to some stuff that happens in the episode still makes it understandable for you. And there's still an introduction and conclusion at the end where I review the entire episode. So yeah, just as a heads up as you go into the episode, this was filmed like like 6 months ago. So yeah, more than 6 months ago, so just keep that in mind. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. My name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to Baker Street Reviews. It's been a while, I know, and I apologize. There's just been a lot of other stuff going on in my life and on the channel, but now we're finally back. For good reason, because not only are we going to do a Baker Street review, we're also going to do it for this week, especially for this week, because this week is Asexual Awareness Week, and we all know our dear beloved detective is one of the most famous asexual characters out there, according to my personal interpretation. Hey. Well, you all know I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan. I have a big video essay on why I think Sherlock Holmes is ace, in case you want to give that a watch before or after this video. And I thought this would be a good time to finally do another Baker Street review. Plus, we're combining this Sherlock Holmes adaptation with another franchise that is very close to my heart. Namely, we're combining today's Baker Street review with Star Trek. And we're combining Sherlock Holmes, one of the most famous asexual character, with one of my other absolute favorite fictional characters of all time, who also happens to be asexual. Namely, I'm talking about the character of Data from The Next Generation. So today, we are going to watch the Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2 episode, Elementary, My Dear Data. Now, this is an episode I have watched many times before, because I regularly rewatch Star Trek The Next Generation every year. And naturally, for good reasons, this is one of my favorite episodes to watch. So this won't be like me reacting to an entirely new thing I've seen, but it's been a while since I've seen the episode, and this is just me reacting to something that I know I will definitely enjoy and is an adaptation that I really, really like, since it combines two of my favorite universes. So, a quick breakdown for those who don't really know anything about Star Trek or Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek The Next Generation takes place in the 24th century on the ship Enterprise, which is led by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, who is played by Patrick Stewart, who we all know and love. So here's a quick rundown of the characters we will encounter in this episode. Not all of them, but just so you have a quick overview of who these characters are that we're going to see. Okay, so we have Captain Jean-Luc Picard. So he's in charge of everything. He's very much basically Patrick Stewart if Patrick Stewart was a space captain. So very eloquent, big on diplomacy, but will not hesitant to be a badass if he needs to be. Then we have the captain's number one, who is Riker. So Riker is basically in charge when Picard isn't in charge. He's a bit of a charismatic womanizer. I don't think we'll see much of him in this episode, though. Then we have Riker's on and off again girlfriend, Diana, who is the ship's counselor, and she also has some alien adjacent feelings, powers, which is why she's so good at counseling. Then we have the chief of security, Worf, who is a Klingon from a proud warrior race, so he's a bit more prone to violence, to being a bit more harsh. However, he does have his reasons if he does need to punch someone in the face. Then we have the chief science officer, Lieutenant Commander Data. Data is an android who is incapable of having human feelings. However, his character arc is very much concerned with humanity, learning how to be human, essentially sort of the Pinocchio kind of character. And as we will see, he's also very much into literature, especially Sherlock Holmes. Now, Data's best friend is Geordi LaForge, who is in charge of engineering. Geordi was born blind but can see with the help of a visor. He's very much sort of the down-to-earth, nice guy who's sort of also helps Data a lot with understanding humanity, and they're very much best friends. And then another character who only appears in this season, so season 2 of The Next Generation, is Dr. Pulaski. Because there were some actor troubles going on at the time, they replaced Dr. Beverly Crusher, the actress of that character, for this one season. So we have Dr. Pulaski, who is sort of a bit more very logical and almost like harsh kind of character, who's sort of the only one who is not really buying this whole shtick that Data could potentially maybe become human at some point, or he tries to understand humanity. So for her, this is going to be important for the episode, for her, Data is basically just a machine and will only ever be a machine. So those are the main characters of Star Trek The Next Generation. The most important ones in this episode will be, as I've said, Data and Geordi. They will take on the roles of Holmes and Watson. In this episode, Captain Picard, naturally, because he's the captain, and Dr. Pulaski, because of this infighting she's sort of got going on with Data, as I've mentioned. So those are sort of our main characters for this episode, and the main setting for this episode is going to be the holodeck. The holodeck is something that exists within or on the Enterprise, on the ship, and it's essentially a room that can project anything you want it to project. So in this case, in the episode we're going to watch, Data wants it to look like a representation of Victorian London as it was presented in the stories of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So the holodeck will be able to just project a scenery, project a person, whatever you wanted to project. It will basically create another world for you, and you can go into this room and then enact with this fake world. It's basically virtual reality, but taking to an extreme as a video game, essentially, if that sort of helps to understand it. So that is what will be that is what our main setting is going to be. I don't want to say too much more. We basically have the premise of Data and Geordi reenacting the Sherlock Holmes stories within the holodeck. That's sort of the general premise that we're going to work with here, but of course there's going to be some trouble on the way. There's a mystery, there's a case they have to solve, they have to get some help from other people. There may be going to be one or two other famous Sherlock Holmes characters along the way. So that's it for the prologue talk. As always, I'm going to give you a little montage of me reacting to the episode, pausing now and then to just chime in with some of my thoughts. Obviously, you can also watch the episode yourself if you want to. I'm gonna catch this one on Netflix, so maybe it's also on your Netflix where you live, so you can go watch it before or after this if you want. And after we finish the episode, I'm just gonna give a little summary on my thoughts, how I think what kind of adaptation I think this is, if it's a good adaptation, if it like manages to capture the spirit of the characters, of the original story, of the world, and if it was just an overall fun story. So without further ado, let's jump into Star Trek Next Generation. I see he's got the pipe. So I've spoken about this before. This is usually sort of a very stereotypical symbol for Sherlock Holmes. He has this kind of pipe, even though if you've seen one of my other videos where I talked about misconceptions about the Sherlock Holmes character, that's not really a pipe the real Sherlock Holmes would have smoked. But I think in this case, it's fine because they're basically playing dress up, as we're going to see in a minute, and it's a nice little early visual indicator. Okay, just a quick chime in from me here, but why I already think this starts out so well from a characterization point of view, because Data is essentially made to play someone like Sherlock Holmes, because Sherlock Holmes himself is often very much described within the stories by Watson to be without emotion, to be machine-like, And that is exactly what we find in Data, who is literally a humanoid machine. He is an android. He literally does not have any feelings. So he's essentially Sherlock Holmes personified, but to a very big extreme, essentially. And you can totally see why Data would gravitate towards a character like Sherlock Holmes, because there are many things that connect them to like the machine-like nature, that they're both not very close to emotions. Data, in his case, even being incapable of feeling emotions. That they're both, if we want to connect it to this week, that they're both asexual. Data, because I mean, he's an android who doesn't feel emotions. He cannot physically or emotionally be sexually attracted to anyone, even though there are instances within the show or the movies where he does have sex or engages in romance, but not because he has those feelings necessarily. And it's another connection to Sherlock Holmes. And Geordi, who we'll see here, takes on the role of Watson, and this is very much a dynamic we see also within Data and Geordi, that Geordi is the one who often humanizes Data, who explains humanity to Data, as very often Watson does for Holmes. That Watson becomes the character who humanizes Holmes. So I think this is already a pretty perfect like character setup, that we have two characters within another franchise who are already very close to this dynamic of another franchise, and this is able to connect so well, as we will see in a minute here. Also, Data, what Data is wearing that morning coat, brilliant, love it.
So you say everything in here has some significance?
Holmes collected nothing, neither trinkets nor thoughts, which were not specifically significant to him.
Correct, very much correct. Here you see that Data obviously pays very close attention to when he reads the stories, and it's very much this idea that we see within the stories as well, that Sherlock Holmes basically only keeps thoughts and ideas that he deems valuable to his personal life, or his, which is more accurate, to his professional life. Like he has this whole discussion with Watson naturally, where it's about the solar system and how he doesn't know certain things, where you would say, oh, that's just like stuff everyone knows just because you do. And Holmes is like, no, if I've ever did know that, I threw it out of my brain because I don't need it for my work. I only keep the stuff I need for my work in my brain. Those are my tools, and my brain is my tool, and I only keep things in my toolbox I actually need, and I throw out everything else. So Data is very much correct when he says everything Holmes has within his flat, within his brain, holds significance to him. But I like this connection here, because for folks who haven't seen the rest of Star Trek Next Generation, Data and Data is a very capable android. Like he's able to pick things up so quickly. He's arguably the smartest and maybe even physically the strongest character in the entire. Well, I'm not sure if it's in the entire canon. I haven't seen everything, but he's definitely one of the smartest characters. Definitely on this show. And he is very much into music, as we see in several episodes of the show. He's on basically on the Enterprise's orchestra and the jazz band and all that. Like he's very much into music, and we do see him play the violin, not just now in this episode, but also in other episodes where he's part of an orchestra. And I do wonder if, because I've always liked this idea, that Data maybe got into playing the violin because Sherlock Holmes also plays the violin. And that this is maybe a connection he made because he feels so close to the Holmes character. It was like, oh, Holmes plays the violin and thought it a nice instrument. What if I give it a try? And then maybe he found pleasantness in it as well. Whatever the equivalent is to a unemotional android, whatever the connection was there. But I like this connection here between these two characters.
Watson, we're about to have guests.
How could you possibly...
Be a good fellow and answer that. Let's not keep the inspector waiting.
Inspector who?
Lestrade, of course.
I just love how this I love how this plays out just like a natural, normal Sherlock Holmes story. That starts out with Holmes and Watson hanging out in Baker Street. Watson is telling us about everyday life at Baker Street. Holmes maybe plays the violin. And then Holmes at some point is like, oh, I think there's a client waiting for us. And Watson's like, what? How could you possibly have known that? This is exactly what's happening here. And I love that. And I love how Geordi is engaging in this play essentially with Data so much, knowing that this character means a lot to his friend, but also that, from what I get here, that the stories also mean a lot to him, or he's at least also a fan of them. I just love the meta level of this, that this is essentially the actor, this is Brent Spiner having to play Data, who is playing his idea of Sherlock Holmes, but also Brent Spiner's idea of who Sherlock Holmes would be, but then that idea of what he thinks Data would think Sherlock Holmes is. You know the meta levels of this. Do you know what I mean? And I do love that you can tell there's a bit of a difference, that Data is putting on a bit of a voice, that he's putting on a bit of a performance, that he's very much into acting the part. We also see throughout the show that he is into acting, that he participates in acting, also like Shakespeare theatre and all that. And I love how he loses himself in that. And it does indeed sound like Sherlock Holmes would have spoken in the original story. So it sort of takes the general vibe and the vocabulary from the original stories to sort of create his version of the Sherlock Holmes character. And even Geordi being like, did Holmes really talk like that? You know, back in the day, essentially. So I like how Data does this here, and I think the general characterization of how he like portrays Sherlock Holmes himself is quite close to what I would imagine that he plays it with, like sort of like very dry sense of humor, almost like a dry sense of wit. There's a lot of like factual neutrality. You can tell he's the smartest person in the room, but there is a bit of a smile in his performance. Like he knows he's the smartest person in the room, and he's trying to be a bit funny about it. Like he's trying to be witty. Like he's having fun with what he's doing.
Oh, I'm not upset with you, Data, really. It's just that we go through all the trouble to arrange the time to go down to the holodeck, to get the proper wardrobe, to get into character, and then boom! Before we even get started, you jump to the end. You see, I was looking forward to the mystery. The fun in the program, Data, was in the attempt to solve a mystery.
I actually think that is a pretty good summary of why we love the Sherlock Holmes story so much. Of course, Sherlock Holmes is smart enough, he could probably guess the solution to many of the problems that are put before him. Like, we would expect him to solve them quite quickly. But that's not the fun, is it? The fun lies in seeing him and Watson exploring the mystery together, not jumping to the conclusion, not all the time. Like, we want to see them work for it, we want to enjoy the dynamic, we want to enjoy the mystery. And I think some adaptations maybe lean into this idea of Holmes being so clever that he's able to like deduce everything a bit too much, why he just jumps to wild conclusions of mysteries we maybe even wanted to find out. Like BBC Sherlock is a bit guilty of that, especially in later episodes, where they just have Sherlock immediately jump to like gigantic conclusions about certain characters or mysteries, where we're like, oh, hang on, won't they like be a bigger thing that we might want to explore? And then they're like, yeah, no, let Sherlock do a really cool, big, badass deduction, just like what Data did now. But that's not the fun. That's not the fun. The fun lies in following these characters and unveiling mystery. That is what Geordi's essentially explaining here. So, another to ask you all a lot of flag at the time for, especially also for being so anti-Data, sort of, because everyone's usually quite nice to him, and everyone, you could argue, coddles him a bit sometimes, which she tries to go against, which is a sentiment I can totally understand. And I think I've learned to like her a bit more as a character over the years. And I do think she has a bit of a point, especially about the Holmes character, that Holmes, even though he does appear very cold and calculating, he does understand how humans work. He understands why people commit certain crimes. He understands why people might be scared of something. He understands why they come to him for help. He might sort of act a bit dismissively towards the idea of feelings, especially in regards to himself, but he will still always understand, or most of the time understand, why humans do certain things. And there will be moments in the canon where he maybe lets a criminal go because he understood and accepts the reason for why they committed a crime. And he's like, okay, yes, I understand that you were put in a difficult position and this is why you had to do this. So I don't want to try and punish you too hard. Like, there are moments like that. And Dr. Pulaski is right, that is very much a big aspect of the Holmes character, that there is a soul to him, that he understands the human soul. And this is what is makes him capable of solving these crimes or understanding the people who come to him or the people he finds. And yes, that is an interesting question posed here compared to Data, who is simply incapable of feelings. He is incapable of feeling human emotions. So it's a good question, would Data still be able to solve all these mysteries like Holmes did? Would Data even act like Holmes did if he was put in similar situations where Holmes would maybe pardon a criminal or maybe not be as harsh? Would Data be the same? Because Data doesn't understand the human soul in the way an actual biological human does. As Dr. Weissing's going to point out, I think in a second, is this is essentially just throwing together various Sherlock Holmes stories and various references to form one big mystery, because the computer just takes the stories and mixes them up. But it's nice to see a sort of various different stories being thrown together. Those are some nice references.
Computer, in the Holmesian style, create a mystery to confound Data with an opponent who has the ability to defeat him.
Remember this line. It's going to be important. Okay, so just physically speaking, I kind of like this guy. Just like physically how he presents as Moriarty. So this is an American actor who's putting on an English accent. I'm sort of biased towards Moriarty preferably having an Irish accent because of the last name, but that's by the by. Physically, I think she's quite well. Sort of has a professor vibe, I think, and here now we get that Moriarty is a creation of the holodeck, but now seemingly somehow has gained knowledge of Enterprise technology, which is a problem. But we've all known Moriarty to be a smart fellow, so let's see where this goes. I just love seeing Data getting into character, and this is very much a typical Holmesian deduction, and Data essentially proving that he is capable of applying deductive reasoning out of context, like out of the context of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I just love how he's able to portray this excitement that you would get from the Sherlock Holmes character, because we always hear in the stories that Watson describes how Sherlock like really gets into the reasoning, how he gets into looking for clues, how he sounds almost like really excited at the idea almost of there being a crime that he gets to solve. And this is very much what we get here, with Data really like leaning into this character. And I like how he sort of exaggeratedly portrays Holmes, but I think it suits the narrative here. I quite like the general demeanor of this Moriarty, like very calm, calculated. Like you can tell that he very much feels secure and safe in his position, and he's not necessarily afraid of him. So, but that he does have respect for him. So I do enjoy the general vibe the actor is giving to this character. And this will be especially interesting as we go on from here, because Moriarty does become self-aware essentially as a projection of the holodeck.
A holographic image, I know. But are you sure? Oh, yes. Does he have life? He's a machine, but is that all he is?
No, he is more.
Moriarty is essentially posing the question I also had in mind now. Like, how much does this Moriarty now differ from Data? Which, again, I think is an interesting parallel, because Holmes and Moriarty are very similar. You could argue two sides of the same coin in a way. Like, they're very clever, like very good at deductive reasoning. They could both apply their intelligence to both good and evil. They're on a very similar skill, just on different sides of the morality spectrum, essentially. And this story sort of drives towards a similar conclusion, but now saying that Data is a humanoid machine. He's an android. He does have matter, but he doesn't have feelings. But he does have a consciousness. But what else is there to him? How human is he? Is he human? And what about this Moriarty now? This Moriarty has grown beyond just being a mere projection on the holodeck. He was programmed to be like Data, or even better than Data. He now has so much more knowledge. Again, they're very similar on different sides of the morality spectrum. And now that this is more of a Star Trek question, how real is this Moriarty now? Is he more or less than Data, essentially? That is what Moriarty is going to argue here. I think this is interesting because this is almost sort of a little bit like the Holmes-Moriarty dynamic that we see in the Reichenbach-Fold story, that both of them very much sort of admire each other. They both have respect for each other. That in this case, well, in the case of the story, it's like they both know they are doomed to fight each other. They know in their case, one of them is doomed to die. But in this case, in the case of Picard and Moriarty, it's almost the other way around, where they have respect for each other. They are on different sides of the morality spectrum, but they're like, neither of us wants the other one to die necessarily. And they're trying to find this compromise. And that's it for Star Trek Next Generation. There is actually, by the way, a follow-up episode to this one where they do re-encounter Moriarty at some point. So I'm probably going to cover this episode at some point as well. Maybe next, maybe at some other point, but I'm definitely going to cover the follow-up episode. So don't worry. But now for this episode, I love this episode. It's one of my favorite Star Trek episodes because it combines two of my favorite things in the world, Star Trek and Sherlock Holmes. And I mean, I've said most of what I want to say throughout the montage. I just think this mix of having like Star Trek and Sherlock Holmes, having someone like Data portray Sherlock Holmes, I think is perfect because Data is the perfect character. There's so many similarities between these two. Like, they're machine-like nature, incapable of feeling emotions, in Data's case quite literally. And I just love that they did make this connection between the two, especially since there has been a connection between Sherlock Holmes and Star Trek before, where I think in a classic episode, Spock quoted Sherlock Holmes, and then I think said it was something an ancestor of his said, which I think is quite funny, which was a neat reference. But in this case, we really had to have two fanboys pretending to be Holmes and Watson, which I just love, because I think that's something we as Sherlock Holmes fans can all sort of get behind, that we would want to do something like this. I just think that's really, really fun. And I just love to see Data get into this character that he is so close to, both as a fan and just in a very literal way, just by how they act, how they feel. I just love this connection between the two. And I like that it starts out basically like a classic Holmes adventure, that we see Holmes and Watson, in this case Data and Geordi, hanging out in Baker Street, just having fun, engaging in this idea of just them hanging out, and then Holmes, or Data in this case, throwing out like some classic Holmesian deductions. I love that it basically starts out like a classic Holmes mystery, like basic everyday stuff. Then we do a little bit of fun deduction, and then at a later point in time, the main mystery is introduced. In this case with Dr. Pulaski, then she gets kidnapped, Moriarty becoming self-aware. Then it just goes off from there, which is very similar to what we see in the original stories, where it usually starts off with a bit of fun domestic stuff at Baker Street, and then the client comes in offering Holmes a case. So I do love that they sort of took these basic storylines from the classic Sherlock Holmes stories and sort of applied it to this universe, essentially. And how they managed to combine like these fictional layers, I think are pretty interesting. And I love the portrayal of Sherlock Holmes as a character in this. Like I already mentioned, there's so many levels to this, because the actor who portrays Data basically has to portray Data, and Data portrays Sherlock Holmes. So it's Data's idea of Sherlock Holmes, but also it's the actor's idea of Sherlock Holmes and the actor's idea of what Data's idea of Sherlock Holmes is. So there are many, many different levels to this, and I think you can very well see how the actor like thought about it. Like Brent Spiner is, to me personally, the best actor on the show, apart maybe from Patrick Stewart. Like, he's really good at nailing this like curiosity and excitement that Data feels about certain things. And I love that you can see that he really does get into character. He likes to exaggerate a bit. He wants to get into the Holmes character. Like, he's a bit boisterous and a bit over the top, and he likes to show off, and he like really leans into the character without like slightly exaggerating it, but without overdoing it, I think. And there's still a clear enough break between him doing the Sherlock Holmes character and then just Data being Data, where you sometimes see him then switch from one characterization to the other, the actor doing a brilliant job here. And I love that you can see that there is a slight difference between Holmes and Data. Now you could argue, is that because Holmes is a fictionalized character who would have feelings and a soul, like what Pulaski said? Or is it that Data is just very good at mimicking this character? Or are we also just seeing Data learning about humanity through a fictional character that humans have created and have very much loved throughout the years? And that's him sort of exploring his love for humanity, his curiosity about humanity, his curiosity about fiction, or what fascinates people about fiction, what fascinates people about Sherlock Holmes. And he's sort of, that is his gateway essentially into further understanding human nature, because he has found this one character that he can sort of latch onto, because he, that's what I'm thinking, that he feels is weirdly similar to him. It sort of gives him a gateway to understanding what is going on. But we also see that he still has a bit to learn, that he totally gets like this theoretical reasoning side of Holmes, which is what I would argue is the biggest part of Holmes' character, is sort of the aspect of Holmes' character that most people think about, that he's, this big reasoning machine who's unfeeling, very machine-like, able to deduce anything at any time, just like logical facts out the wazoo, basically. And we see that is sort of what Data also does, and he's very good at doing the deduction, he's good at combining like all the clues and all that. But there is also more to the character, like what Dr. Pulaski says, there's more to Holmes. He does understand the feelings of people around him, he understands that people have a soul, he very much, even though he is himself not very emotionally open that way, he understands why certain people have certain emotions. And that is put into question here for Data. Does he have this ability as well? Can he develop this ability like Holmes, or is he simply capable of being Holmes from a intellectual point of view? And I think this is an aspect of the character that many adaptations haven't always nailed. Again, sort of BBC Sherlock is a good example here, that they've made Holmes to a certain degree way too rude and over the top in terms of like his intellectualism, but sort of forgot that Holmes very much does have feelings, even though he doesn't always openly show them, that he is a bit humorous at times, and he does everything with a bit of wit and a bit of a grin, and that he's very much capable of understanding the feelings of the people who come to him, or the people that he later encounters via solving the crime. So I like how they were able to combine here this dichotomy of having an unfeeling machine-like character plus the aspect of a soul, the aspect of understanding emotions. And I think it's an interesting aspect to explore, not only for Data as a character, but also using Sherlock Holmes as a character to explore this aspect of Data. In terms of mystery, this isn't like a classic Holmes mystery. Naturally, it isn't. I mean, it's a sci-fi show. Moriarty essentially becomes a sentient hologram. But I like that in the beginning, it starts off, like I said, like a classic Holmes mystery. I like that we sort of get like some references to the Sherlock Holmes canon, like what we saw, the Red-Headed League, Scandal in Bohemia, the Speckled Band. Like, I like that they throw in like a couple of references here and there for the fans of the stories who would know what everything means. I like that I throw that in there, but then sort of basically come up with a Holmesian sci-fi adventure. And I know that Sherlock Holmes occasionally does get crossover with not necessarily hard sci-fi, but more like the supernatural. So actually, is there like, someone tell me, is there like a crossover where Sherlock Holmes is like in sci-fi? I know we watched Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century, whatever that was. We did watch that cartoon where it's Sherlock Holmes in the future, which is quite fun. So I would love to know if there are more stories like that, which basically have Sherlock Holmes in a hard sci-fi setting, because I do think that's quite an interesting aspect here. However, this isn't really that big of a mystery. This isn't really interested in telling a Holmes and mystery that way. It's more, it does have elements of it, but it's more interested in, and that's very much Star Trek, especially Star Trek Next Generation, it's more interested in exploring its characters. It's more interested in exploring philosophies about its characters that we see here. You know, Moriarty becoming sentient, developing a consciousness. Is he now similar to Data? If Data is allowed to go out and be a person, why is Moriarty now not allowed to go out and be a person? You know, those kinds of questions are being posted. So this is very much using the Sherlock Holmes stories and Sherlock Holmes characters to explore philosophical sci-fi questions, which I do like. So, in conclusion, I do really, really, really love this episode. I think Data is the perfect kind of fictional character to combine with Sherlock Holmes because there are so many similarities between the two, and I think it's interesting that we are able to use Sherlock Holmes to explore philosophical questions or questions about humanity and feelings in this other sci-fi character that we have. Because, like I said, Data is essentially Sherlock Holmes taken to an extreme to a certain degree, if you want. So I think it's interesting to see how they use the parallels between these two characters to explore different aspects of Data as a person and also of Sherlock Holmes as a fictional character, like what made him such an interesting person, what made him such an interesting character. So I like how they were able to combine the two. Like Geordi and Data like perfectly fit this Holmes-Watson dynamic because, like Watson, Geordi is there to not only partner up with Holmes, but to help him understand what happens around him, to help him understand humans. He's the one who humanizes Data. Geordi is that person for Data, just as much as Watson is this person for Holmes. So I think this dynamic is like perfectly, I think, represented here, just within a sci-fi setting. And Moriarty, I think, is an interesting character in this case because it does start out as sort of this classic idea that we do have of the character, and I think the actor who portrays Moriarty is good. Like, he gives him a good vibe where you do feel there is something intimidating about him, but there's also more to him. And I think it was a hard task probably for the writers to be like, okay, we now have this fictional character that people have a good idea about, but now we have taken him into like a sci-fi setting where he becomes more than what we know from the canon. So it's probably difficult to sort of combine these two, to still have Moriarty, be this very highly intellectual, highly intelligent opponent to Holmes, but now also have him become someone new because he has gained so much awareness and so much more new knowledge. And I think in the follow-up episode that we might cover next time, this is basically continued because Moriarty, as we see here at the ending, they basically continue this. They bring Moriarty back, him becoming maybe a sentient hologram or whatever. So again, here we have this idea of using a popular fictional character to explore sci-fi philosophy, sci-fi questions. Overall, fun episode. I honestly think this is like a must-watch if you're a Sherlock Holmes and a sci-fi fan. I mean, if you like Star Trek and Sherlock Holmes, you've probably seen this episode anyway. I hope I was able to maybe introduce you to the Star Trek universe if you haven't really watched Star Trek yet. Or maybe if you have watched Star Trek but weren't really familiar with the Sherlock Holmes stories before, maybe now I was able to get you interested in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Who knows? I'm just glad two of my favorite things, or two of my favorite fictional universes, were able to be combined in this one episode, and I'm looking forward to covering the follow-up at some point. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please do tell me down in the comments below what your thoughts are on this episode. Have you seen this episode before? Are you a Trekkie and or Sherlock Holmes fan? Just like give me your thoughts and feelings down in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. Also, as always, if you have any suggestions for future Baker Street reviews, put them down in the comments below. Can be anything. Can be television. Can be a film. Can be a book. Can be, I don't know, an audiobook, video game, whatever. As long as it has Sherlock Holmes in it, I will take a look at it. That's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done already. And I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.